A landmark case in court today where a $2.5 billion class action lawsuit against the federal government will be heard, alleging systemic discrimination of Black workers dating back more than 50 years. CTV's Colton Prail is following the story for us. He joins me now with more. So, Colton, let's begin with what the suit alleges.
Yeah, really, this is a commentary or allegation of discrimination and practices against Black and racialized employees, really across all bodies of the federal government, and it goes back years. I mean, this lawsuit, should it go ahead, and it's important to note that this is a classification hearing. This is what will determine if these different groups can bring forward this larger class action lawsuit against the federal government, or if they'll have to do it as individuals. If that does go forward, we're looking at allegations that stem from multiple different governments, bodies that stem over multiple years, that could include employees all the way back to the 1970s. But even if we just look into the past recent years, we've seen a number of admissions and findings from within the federal public service and by the government itself that there have been practices that were discriminatory. We saw it first with the Canadian Human Rights Commission, a finding by the Treasury Board Secretariat after 9 employees filed union grievances back in October of 2020, that there was anti-Black racism within the Canadian Human Rights Commission. And of course, since then, we've seen the change in the Canadian Human Rights Commissioner. We've seen a response to this and these findings from the federal government. We've also seen internal reports from the Privy Council Office from last summer. The Privy Council Office, of course, oversees all federal public servants. We're talking about hundreds of Privy Council employees, about 1,200. Some were interviewed. Some of those who were interviewed were racialized, and inside that internal report, there were findings of discriminatory behavior that was being, and I quote here, regularly practiced and normalized, including at the executive level. It spoke about distrust for the higher Privy Council office from Black and racialized employees. And then we also saw another report that came out from the Auditor General last October, where it talked about departments, specifically justice departments, including the RCMP, which weren't doing enough to combat discrimination and racism. They may have started initiatives to include more diversity, more equity, but there was no data on these initiatives. Very frequently, these bodies weren't even tracking to see if their initiatives were even successful. They also weren't checking to see, many weren't checking to see if racialized employees, particularly Black employees, were staying with the offices themselves. Were they retaining these employees? Were they promoting these employees? This lack of data really put the government in a situation where it couldn't say whether it was fostering an environment that was improving situations that had previously been discriminatory against racialized employees. So all of these combine into this potential larger class action lawsuit that, as you mentioned, we could be looking at about $2.5 billion in damages, what they're seeking, but the next 12 days will determine whether they're able to bring that forward as a group.